It is 2:30 in the morning. I just got off a 12-hour shift from work. My light bulb just went out, so my lighting is completely thrown off for this video. But yet, here we go. Prairie Sports Talk, August 1st, 2024. Let's do it. Hello everybody, my name is Jackie and welcome to Prairie Sports Talk, the podcast where we talk about sports that directly impact the Canadian Prairie. Today is August 1st, 2024, and despite the fact the world seems to be throwing everything it can at me to prevent me from making this episode, here we go. We got some very interesting topics to talk about today. Despite the fact I'm very tired, I still think this is going to be a very interesting episode because we're going to open up talking about the interesting couple of days the Jays had leading up to the MLB trade deadline, and we're going to talk about the chaotic week or so it has been in the CFL. Let's get into it. On Tuesday, the MLB trade deadline officially passed, and the Toronto Blue Jays were very, very busy in the last couple of days. They traded some major pieces. We're going to focus on what was traded away from the Jays and what the future looks like for the Toronto Blue Jays in my eyes. So, we have traded Kevin Kiermaier to the Los Angeles Dodgers. Isaiah Kiner-Falefa, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that name, to the Pittsburgh Pirates. Trevor Richards to the Minnesota Twins. Yusei Kikuchi to the Houston Astros. Justin Turner and Yimi Garcia in different trades, both to the Seattle Mariners. Danny Jansen to the Boston Red Sox, and Nate Pearson to the Chicago Cubs. That is a lot, to say the very least. So, let's start with the two players we traded to the Mariners, Turner and Garcia. Garcia has had a back and forth season. When he's been on, he has been one of the best pitchers for the Jays. When he's been struggling, it's been painful to watch. And Justin Turner, in my opinion, the most confusing signing this offseason for the Jays, because in my opinion, they already have one of the best first basemen in the MLB in Vladimir Guerrero Jr., and then they also turned around and signed Joey Votto, who has just spent almost the entire season on the injured list in the minors. I don't know why we went out and got Turner. The Jays bet everything this offseason on trying to get Shohei Ohtani and Juan Soto, and when they couldn't land either player, the Jays kind of panicked and signed Justin Turner as almost a consolation prize. And Turner really struggled with the Jays. He was not the player we hoped he would be, to say the very least. And unfortunately, that has led to him having a really rough season. And that has been very fitting for the kind of season the Jays have had. And of course, as soon as we trade Turner, he goes to Seattle, makes a highlight reel catch against Boston, because why not? Why wouldn't Justin Turner show the flashes of the kind of player we hoped he would be as soon as we move him? Why not? It's just been that kind of season for the Jays. Now on to what I believe to be one of the more interesting trades, because just a few days after Kevin Kiermaier announced he will be retiring at the end of the season, the Jays traded him to the LA Dodgers. This one hurt because I really, really like Kiermaier. He has quickly become one of my favorite players in the league since he joined the Jays, and I became more familiar with him as a player. And I absolutely adore what he can do in the outfield. It is an absolute pleasure to watch him play out there. But now he has been moved to the Dodgers. And to my understanding, this is probably because this is almost a gift to Kiermaier, because they have now traded him to a team that is contending for a championship this season. So best of luck to him, as well as all the other Jays that got traded. but especially to Kiermaier. So then we move on to IKF. He's another player who's had an up and down season. He's a very key utility player if you can get him in positions that he can shine in, but that is something the Jays really struggled to do, in my opinion. And it showed. IKF just was another player who I don't feel played as well as he could have. And now on to one of the more painful trades. Danny Jansen has been traded to the Boston Red Sox. Oh boy. Danny Jansen, ever since I became a Jays fan and really started to care about the team, he has been one of my more favorite players. And I always liked the fact that the Jays have been able to platoon out multiple skilled catchers. But now, as Cook potentially is starting to show signs that he is dropping off, we have moved the younger Jansen. It's less than ideal, in my opinion. But at the same time, what makes it hurt even more is the fact that we have dealt him to a divisional rival nonetheless, because he is now playing in Boston. So we're going to see a lot of him this season and in the coming years. At least that would be my assumption. And now let's move on to Trevor Richards. I mean, I don't really have too much to say about him. He's played solid, nothing too special or nothing that's really stood out to me. I'm not an expert on pitching, to say the very least. But, I mean, I understand why the Twins would want a pitcher like him. And the Jays obviously felt the return they got for him was satisfactory enough to send him over. And then we move on to Nate Pearson. I mean, same story here. I don't know too much about him. I feel like the Jays were just kind of trying to offload players and just get more players in return. And that's how I feel a lot of these trades might have went down. So we move on finally to Yusei Kikuchi. Oh man, this one sucks. This one really sucks. Yusei very quickly became one of my more favorite starters on the Jays. And we really watched him blossom into a very skilled starting pitcher in his few seasons with the Jays. And now the Houston Astros are getting a very skilled player in Yusei Kikuchi, at least for the rest of the season, but I would not be overly surprised if they try and succeed to re-sign him in the offseason. Best of luck to all the Blue Jays that have been traded. Best of luck to the Blue Jays who are still on the team. As for what's next for the Jays, well, Ross Atkins is insisting that the Jays still intend to be a threat in 2025. But with all the players we have moved this offseason, all the players we have moved this season, the lack of moves this past offseason, and the fact that almost every player we got for long term is a prospect, I don't know how we're going to contend next season. I really don't. I feel like the Jays should do everything in their power to keep Vladimir Guerrero and Bo Bichette, because those two are the heart and soul of the team. But if it comes down to one or the other, Vladdy's got to be the guy you take. He has to be, because he's the guy who has really built this franchise from the point he put on a Blue Jays jersey, showed up to practice for the first time. He has redefined what it means to be a Blue Jay. The Blue Jays are now a team that is both about playing well and having fun while playing ball. And that is something that has spread throughout the league. The Jays were one of the first teams in the league, if not the first team, to introduce a home run prop. And now almost every team in the league has it after the Jays introduced their home run jacket and then eventually retired it before bringing it back this season. But that's a whole nother story. Things like that don't happen without Vladdy. He is the man who has set the culture for the Jays. They need to do everything in their power to keep him. He is the cornerstone of on to the chaotic week that was in the CFL. So we started with a dream matchup to anybody who's been watching football over the last couple of years. We got Cody Fajardo's Montreal Alouettes taking on Trevor Harris's Saskatchewan Roughriders. The quarterback switched places a few years ago. Fajardo left Saskatchewan on bad terms after the fans basically ran him out of town because of a rough season that, in hindsight, was Craig Dickinson's fault. And then we got Trevor Harris, the person who was moved on from so that Montreal could sign Cody. And what's that? Oh no, they both were injured. Neither of them played in this game. Okay, whatever. We still got an amazing running back matchup. We got Walter Fletcher from the Montreal Alouettes and AJ... What? I'm being told that AJ Ouellette was injured as well. Okay, whatever. Frankie Hickson. We got Frankie Hickson. Alright. So, this game ended up being very interesting for entirely different reasons than I expected it to be when it was first announced. So we ended up seeing a very interesting backup quarterback matchup. So we started with Shea Patterson for the Saskatchewan Roughriders going up against Caleb Evans for the Montreal Alouettes. Shea Patterson had a very solid game. He went 21 for 33 for 222 yards. Very solid for a backup. Nothing to complain about for the Riders beyond the fact that a thrown touchdown would have been a major difference maker for the Roughriders. And then we move on to Caleb Evans on the Montreal Alouettes. He really struggled in this game, which is why after the first half where he threw 9 for 17 for 91 yards, he got pulled. Davis Alexander got put in the game for the Montreal Alouettes with the Roughriders leading 16-3. Davis Alexander came in, he changed this game. He threw 15 for 18 for 178 and 2 touchdowns. At halftime, it was 16-3 Saskatchewan. The Alouettes ended up winning this game 20-16. A really shocking game for Davis Alexander here. I hadn't even heard of him before this game, and he ended up coming in and being the difference maker. I also want to talk about how coaching adjustments changed the game for Montreal as well. Because in the first half, Frankie Hickson was running wild over the Alouettes. He put up over 100 yards in just the first half. And then in the second half, silent. He was basically silent. But this game came down to 2 crucial moments in my opinion. 2 missed field goals. Saskatchewan hit the post on the left side of the uprights and the bottom on a different kick. Those 6 points would have been enough to push Saskatchewan over the top to not allow Montreal to finish the comeback. But regardless, this was a very fun game to watch between the 2 teams that were leading their divisions headed into this week. I'm very excited to attend their game in Mosaic in a couple weeks. It's going to be a very fun game to watch. And then we move on to a very, very surprising blowout in my opinion. A game that was a statement for one team. The Ottawa Red Blacks blew out the Stampeders 33-6. I did not expect this game to be so lopsided. I didn't expect this game to be won by Ottawa. This game was basically everything I didn't expect it to be. But one thing that was very fun to watch with this game, Drew Brown has grown so much as a player this season so far. If you go back, watch week 1, the first week the Red Blacks played, he played solid. He did. He's played solid all season. But then you compare it to how he played this past week, It's like watching a whole new player. Yes, you can see some similarities, but he now looks so much more confident as a passer. He looks like he trusts his receivers more often. He knows his O-line's tendencies. This has been a very, very fun season to watch Drew Brown grow into a potential future superstar for the Red Blacks. And honestly, I can't wait to see what the future holds for him. In this game, he went 30 for 37 for 325 yards and a touchdown. Meanwhile, over for Calgary, Jake Mayo, well, he certainly did play. Jake Mayo did play in this game. I can confirm that. He passed 27 times, 20 completions for 136 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions. About the least noteworthy game a quarterback can play. And honestly, that's the most noteworthy thing you can say about how Calgary's offense played. It wasn't very noteworthy. Meanwhile, their defense, are we sure they showed up this game? Are we sure those weren't just random fans they put onto the field because a good chunk of the defense forgot to show up? Because that's how they played. The defense is not what I've come to expect from Calgary this season, and it's not what I've come to expect from a Dave Dickenson team. I feel like this was just a blip on what should be a pretty good season for a team I think will make the playoffs from Calgary. And I feel like this was a statement game for the Red Blacks. I think the Red Blacks might be for real. The Red Blacks are having a really good season, a lot better than almost anyone could have predicted. I can't wait to see what the future holds for them this season and down the road. So then we move on to, well, this game happened. It sure did happen. The Toronto Argonauts and the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. These two teams look like two teams who didn't want to win the game. They really didn't. And no moment was better exemplified that than in overtime. Winnipeg's offense did not show up. Just plain and simple, it did not show up in overtime. They were unable to do their kicker any favors. And yes, this should have been a chip shot field goal for Castile. But he missed. And the offense, they could have made this easier for him. Yes, he should have made it. And also, yes, the offense should have made it easier for him, maybe even scored a touchdown. Two things can be true at the same time. And this is a case where both the kicker and the offense should have done better than they did. And then some questionable play calling from Toronto. All they had to do was walk onto the field, kick a field goal, walk off, it's over. They run a couple plays. I mean, like, yes, I know I was just talking about the fact that Winnipeg's offense should have been more productive. But at this point in the game for Toronto, there was no point to put their offense out. Send their special teams out right away, kick the field goal, get out of there. Don't give Winnipeg a chance. Worst case scenario, Hairolahu boots it through the end zone and they get a single. Both teams get a single. We go to a second overtime mini game. Both teams took a lot of really stupid and unnecessary risks. And Toronto just ended up succeeding on one, maybe two more unnecessary risks than Winnipeg did. And that ended up being the difference makers. Meanwhile, for Winnipeg, oh boy, this season's really getting away from them. At this point in the season, Winnipeg, you better have installed that panic button and be ready to hit it at a moment's notice. Because if you get much further behind in the West, you get too many more losses, you're not making the playoffs this season. You've made it to the Grey Cup 4 out of 4 of the last seasons, and you've won 2 of them. You have no excuse to be struggling this much. At the end of the day, the Bombers are getting old. These are some of the best players in recent memory in the CFL. Willie Jefferson, one of the most ferocious defensive ends to play football in the last couple of years. He looks tired almost every play. Yes, he randomly will be able to break up a play, whether that's using his insanely long reach to tip a ball or just managing to blow by the offensive lineman. But last season, he was doing that sort of stuff every single play. And this season, you're lucky to see it once in a half. Lucky to see it. Meanwhile, Zach Collaros, he does not look like the Collaros we have seen since he joined Winnipeg. Collaros is a future Hall of Famer. But he is struggling this season. This does not look like Zach Collaros. He's dropping back in the pocket, making bad reads, throwing the ball too soon, but also sometimes too late. He's throwing it to the wrong guys. He does not look comfortable in the pocket like he has for so many seasons in the CFL. This is not the St. Bartlem's team, and they are struggling because they kept the same players. Well, those players were dropping down in skill just ever so slightly every season, and now they've just barely dropped off enough that they are not as effective in the CFL as they should be. Okay, so the week ended with a very, very interesting quarterback duel. You had the veteran Bo Levi Mitchell having a career game, throwing 5 touchdowns for the first time in his career. He looked like the Bo Levi Mitchell of old. Granted, the Elks defense, well, they didn't really help themselves. They really struggled in this game. But then, early in the fourth quarter, everything changed. Edmonton changed their quarterback, and that changed the entire landscape of the game. Momentum shifted to Edmonton. Confidence was regained both on offense and defense. Trey Ford came into the game, and he changed everything. In just 12 minutes in the fourth quarter, he threw 10 for 15 for 121 yards and an absurd 3 touchdowns. If he had been put in a quarter earlier, Edmonton probably completes the comeback. But because he was put in with so little time left, Hamilton ends up winning this 44-28, and the score makes it look a lot worse than the fourth quarter was. Edmonton dominated in the fourth quarter. Trey Ford might have just arrived, and he is starting next week in the CFL. The future is here. The future is now. So, who is Trey Ford's first victim? Oh no. Oh no. It's my Saskatchewan Roughriders. Uh-oh. And finally, let's move on to the upcoming week in the CFL. So we open up the week with what, in my opinion, should be a very easy win for BC. They are taking on Winnipeg. Yes, it is in Winnipeg, but at the end of the day, these are two teams trending in opposite directions. Winnipeg is on a downward spiral. Meanwhile, BC is ramping up, hoping to contend for the Grey Cup this season. And at this point in the year, I'd say they are still probably my favorites to win the Grey Cup. I don't think BC is going to have any major issues with this. Watch for VA to have another very, very big game. And watch for Collaros to, unfortunately, continue to struggle. There's not really much more to say about it. I mean, you got a struggling team taking on a really hot team that's coming off a bye week. It's pretty cut and dry, in my opinion, over how this game is going to go. So then you move on to another game that is pretty cut and dry. You've got the Montreal Alouettes, likely with Cody Fajardo back in the lineup this week, or at least very close to being back in the lineup, taking on the Hamilton Ticats. And yes, Bo just is coming off a career best 5 touchdowns, but that's against Edmonton. Edmonton's defense, it exists. That's about the best thing you can say about it. It's kind of just been cobbled together with players that don't necessarily mesh together well. There doesn't seem to be a real defensive scheme for Edmonton. and they just kind of play football. I don't know how else to put it. I think Montreal is just going to pick apart this defense. Even if Cody isn't back, I feel like Davis Alexander is just going to come in and just run through these guys in the same way he just kind of ran through the Riders last season. I mean, not last season, last week. And then we move on to what I am potentially controversially putting as my game of the week. Edmonton is visiting Saskatchewan. Trey Ford is starting for the first time this season. But despite that, I'm still going Rough Riders. I think the Riders will win, but I don't think it's going to be because of a lack of a solid performance from Trey Ford. I feel like Ford is going to show up and he's going to have a great game. But I also feel like the Saskatchewan defense is going to force the young star into making one or two small mistakes, and that is going to result in a key turnover that shifts the tide of the game in a way that Saskatchewan can capitalize on and use that to either gain momentum or win the game just directly off it. I feel like Saskatchewan's defense is going to make a very key play. And I also feel like Shea Patterson is going to have a solid game, but it's going to be one of those games where it's nothing to write home about, but it's going to have a game full of a lot of really, really good signs for his potential future development. And then we wrap up the week with an interesting matchup. We have Toronto visiting Calgary. Toronto's coming off a rough showing against the Bombers despite the fact they got the walk-off win. Calgary's coming off a disastrous game against Ottawa. So I think this is going to be two teams looking to prove themselves as they head into a matchup of two teams very much in the middle of their divisions. I feel like this is going to be a back and forth game, but at the end of the day, I think Calgary is going to walk out with a very narrow win. I feel like Jake Mayer is going to have a very solid game, and he's going to remind us exactly what he is capable of, and he's going to have a very solid game. I can't wait to watch this week of CFL football. It is full of very fun games. Can we just get the week of football started already? Let's go. And lastly, just a couple housekeeping issues. So, number one, I didn't talk about the Olympics this week because once the Olympics are all said and done, I want to just have one big video where I talk about the Olympics and only the Olympics. And I just kind of recap how they went for Team Canada, some notable stories, such as the women's soccer scandal, the complete and utter brilliance from McIntosh in the pool, and any other storylines that may develop through the next week of the Olympics as well. It has been very fun to watch them this year, and I'm really enjoying them, to say the very least. And secondly, I also want to announce that sometime in August, I'm not sure on a date yet, I plan to have an end of season special for the Swift Current 57s. This season is drawing to an end in very early August, and it's been an absolute blast volunteering for them this season. I'm already looking forward to next season, and I want to take a video and just kind of talk about the season, both my experiences, how the team played, that sort of stuff. But for now, that is everything I have for you guys this week. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. If you're on YouTube and if you're on Spotify, be sure to follow the 13th Man Podcast Network. I hope you guys have a great day. I hope you guys have a great week. I hope you guys have a great whatever. Stay safe, stay strong, you got this. And this is Jackie for Prairie Sports Talk, signing off.